Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Saraj Mohammed. I work alongside the lovely Hazel at Burnley East PCN. I'm the Health Inequalities Project Manager there.
Good afternoon, I'm Roxy Ahmed. I work in family safeguarding and social care now. I support people through their addiction journey.
Hello, my name is Marta Szczubiak. I work on inpatient unit as a healthcare assistant.
And my name is Cosima Towneley, and I've worked in local government for over 20 years. And I'm a local of Burnley. My mother died in hospice and my father died at home.
So the first question to start off with is to say, do you feel that death and dying is openly talked about within your particular community?
From what I've already learned and from my family, we don't openly talk about death. We don't talk about planning and funerals or anything. To be fair with that topic, it's very, very a secret. It brings really strong emotions. Very often is taken as a bad look, talking about it. So, as I say, it is being avoided at many occasions.
I have to say that in my own family and wider circle, yes, quite often talk about death. It's very open, actually, and it's rather fun planning people's funeral. I think I was quite lucky that my father lived almost 101, so we planned his funeral several times over. With him, I mean, it was very important to us to actually discuss it with him, and it was very important to him to actually make this we should know. And I suppose that's also part of our Catholic faith. It is that in life we are in death, and we believe it is at the end, which is always very helpful. And sometimes it makes us perhaps a little too irreverent. And I do know that with some people it is probably a much more sensitive subject, but being an immensely practical family, I'm afraid within ours it is something, it's a common topic of conversation, and sadly not a taboo subject.
I think if I can add totally opposite to what you said, Marta, is that my mother, God rest her soul, was obsessed with death. It was almost like every time she did something, I might die tonight. No, you're not going to die tonight. No, you're not going to die. Or everything was planning towards dying. You know, as soon as she hit a certain age, I remember hitting 50, she thought that was it, life's over. So, well, how can it be? You know, and I'm nearly 55 this year, and I think, my God, life's just begun. It's totally different when you get that age yourself, don't you? But she was obsessed. I used to joke with my mum all the time, because I'm Pakistani. Both my parents are Pakistani, I'm British born. And I used to always say to her, I said, look, the only time you go out, Mum, is if you're going to go and see a dead body. And she'd be like, no. Well, no, I said, this daily. I said, you seem to have this obsession about going to see somebody's face and you've not even met, culturally. And it's like, culturally, she used to go and she used to earn a friend, and she used to get together. I'm like, where are you all going? So like a day out. It was really odd. It was very surreal, whereas I'm of a different generation. My daughter, I can't imagine her certainly doing that at all. But death was all coming talked about all the time, whether you're having dinner, whether you've just come down after a bath. It's like, right, like, guess what, mother, I've not died last night. I'm still here. You know, so what now? Let's on again. Culturally, we talk about death a lot. And as far as planning, it's like, you know, it's no real planning as such. It's like, if it happens, it will happen.
So the only difference I would add to what Roxy said, so Roxy mostly mentioned from the cultural point of view, and specifically the South Asian culture.
Yeah.
The only thing different to that I would add, which would hopefully give value to the conversation and the discussion from a faith point of view and from an Islamic faith point of view, is that death is a very practical aspect of living. And Islam and Muslims being practical people, and the teaching that we have from the get-go, from day one, from birth, is very practical and pragmatic. And what I mean by that is, you may have heard the call to prayer that sometimes when you're on holiday or even here locally. So that's the call to prayer for congregational prayers that goes on 5 times a day. When a person is born in the Muslim family, the family member will actually recite the same call to prayer in one ear and also in the other ear of that child, of that baby, male or female. And what that is the actual, it might sound a little bit morbid, and I apologize if it does, but that's preparation for that person, that child's passing. So when eventually that individual's life expires and there is the funeral taking place for that individual, that same call of prayer doesn't need to be repeated. So that's how prominent death is. That's the point I'm making. As far as from the get-go, it's said there, and it's a reminder that life is not permanent and that there is an end. And then throughout life, there's prophetic traditions that teach us and advise us about the importance of having wills, about the importance of advanced planning, and the importance of laying everything that we want for ourselves around that time. And then as far as practical things like finances and wills and what we leave behind. And then the actual concept of death itself, the way that it's pronounced and described within the Holy Quran, which is the Muslim equivalent of the Torah or the Bible, is that the actual verse to the meaning is every soul shall taste death. Now, some scholars interpret that and the use of the word taste in the sense that if you have lived a good and righteous life, your death will be a positive and good taste. And if you've lived a sinful life, then it will be a sour, a bad taste. So again, that's very kind of extolling and encouraging the value of living a good life, living a life where you're serving others and being a positive impact to the community around you. And then very much so, as what the colleague mentioned earlier on, that life is only one stage. It's not the end. It's a transitory, and it's like going through this door into another room. So I'm not going to anticipate some of the other questions, but just to explain that that's how we explain death to whoever it may be, young or old, ill or healthy, that this is an essential part to get to the next part of the stage of life, which is permanent. There will be no death there. And and positive aspect is if you've lived a good life in this life, then you will have a permanent, positive, enjoyable life in the hereafter. So that it's just trying to encompass all that.
It's rather like saying your rosary or something. I know we don't like worry bead. I was really interested to hear about the quoting of the Quran through the child's ears, in the same way that we automatically, when death was much more prevalent in younger generations, one would be prepared to have priests to administer the first rites to be baptism. So, I mean, all faiths are prepared in that way for the immediate. We tend to only think of death as an older people's problem in a way. And these days, especially when we still seem to block out that we have a lot of premature deaths, it is quite nice to know that each of our faiths, or none, to be honest, although people do tend to find they suddenly have a faith at various stages, especially in extremis, are called upon, and that those are people remember everything that they've been taught as a child, which is still quite prevalent in the schools, and it is a comfort. I find, there is ritual and family ritual that is associated with anything around. And I think we sometimes try to make it a very personal, silent, isolated kind of a life event in a hospital, clinical, which is why I think actually the hospice makes such a difference, especially within the community. And it's so better if I do a motherless here. Bringing the animals down, to be honest. There's simple things like that. And the young lady who was standing in the room next door, one of the dogs going in, and she was absolutely delighted. And it just, you would never have got anything like that anywhere else. And, it's just, sorry, I just wanted to really bring that in alongside the kind of rituals that we have, although we've probably forgotten them, whether you're young or old. Yeah.
So the action of the prayer that we read 5 times a day is to then end the prayer by facing this way and reading some Arabic verses and then turning this way. Now the prophetic tradition is that we don't know, having turned to the right first, whether we will live long enough to be able to then turn left. So life is seen as so short and so fragile and so precious. But again, with Islam, there is balance. And why I emphasize that is, whilst we're all talking about death, that's the topic of the day, Islam is also very, very keen and important that it's not the only focus in life. Whilst you have life, that should be the optimum. That should be about living life to the full extent. And therefore, you don't wish to reduce life in any way or reduce the quality of life in any way. So if there is anything that you can do to extend life and enrich life, whether that's treatment, that's anything else, then that should be pursued. It's only at the point where that becomes redundant and it's actually causing more harm to the individual by administrating medical attention and not actually prolonging life, but just kind of an existence, like somebody in a coma or a vegetable state. You're actually doing more harm than good. Only in that stage of life would the concept of palliative care be introduced and treatment allowed to be withdrawn. Up to that point, treatment is encouraged throughout because life is so precious and every effort should be made about preserving life. And hence, if I can just add the concept of life and how precious it is, in the sense, if a person kills one person, he has killed the whole of humanity. This is prophetic tradition. So you may have killed one individual and you think it's only one individual. The prophet said, no, you've killed a whole community. And the adverse of that, the opposite of that, if you have saved one life, you have saved a whole community. So that's how important life is in balance with death.
And I think I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think often in healthcare we do find a challenge working with people from some particular communities, because we often feel that they are wanting to sort of pursue medication and treatments for longer and longer than actually we feel that is helpful.
Yes.
So understanding the reason behind that is really useful, useful to us.
Yeah.
I can say the whole topic again is taboo in the Polish community. Like I said, we don't talk about it openly. Regarding the funeral planning or advanced care planning, I spoke with a few people, and it seems it depends on the social groups. So people who are more stable financially, it's more often they will plan the funerals, they will make the advanced care plan. But there is still people who are very, very poor in Poland, who will completely forget about it and won't even think about it really, and they do tend to just focus on the present and just they live day by day basically. But yes, the full topic of a death is a taboo. I even noticed when I was away in Poland in April, when I've mentioned to people that I've met where I work, I could see the sadness and the fear on their faces, and they very often say to me, "Oh, I don't know how you're doing it. I don't know how you're coping with what you're doing and where you're working." So, like I said, it's very hard. It's very hard topic in the Polish community. Very often, when this happens, it's very fast. It just happens, and then the people start planning, and then it becomes like everything becomes very, very sad, and people don't have like big knowledge about hospices, about palliative care. Some people, from what I know, prefer to stay in the hospitals, but very often the people stay at home without any treatment, without any help, and then the family just deal with it when it comes. I think there's a plenty of Polish people around Lancashire, from what I know, and me, because I also worked in the community as a carer. I've met plenty of them, and they're not very welcome to hospice very often, as in the Polish families, they don't want the help because they still think, like I said, the hospice for them or a dying is something they don't want to hear about. It's like nearly giving up for them. So they still believe it will be fine, it will be okay. We don't need your help. We've got a family. I will look after that person myself, for example, that mother, father, or siblings. And I've seen this here a lot when I was going to translate for someone because the family couldn't speak very well English, and they were basically trying to just avoid the help at all costs.
Because it means they have to talk about it.
Because that's it, yes. And then it means, I think it means that it will become true that this person is gonna die shortly.
I think, well, we're very bad at talking about money, aren't we? Anyway, as British. And dying and the actual process of making your will are two very separate events. I think people do very much think about it, talk about it, but don't necessarily do it. Hence the number of people who die intestate, which of course is an extra stress on the family after that. And that quite often I feel is slightly selfish of the person who's died, because, and I don't speak from experience of this, I just like to say, but I have seen it happen, where it will cause undue arguments within the family themselves at a particular time when they really need to be drawing together. And sometimes these are just they're not really rifts that can be closed afterwards, and they're quite unnecessary. So I think, so yes, although we all know about it, they do tend to be two completely separate areas of thought process while people are, dying, and quite often we don't think about the practicalities until you're actually an extremist. So it is something that needs to be discussed, and much more not once you are actually at the end stage. And I do believe that at the moment there's a lot of advertising around death, and many of the undertakers and people on TikTok and whatever it is. There is a lot more going on in that. So I think it will get more, but it's still slightly something that once you've seen it, you'd like to forget about it. I don't quite know how you get the practicalities of that out and the importance of actually discussing that, even if you discuss nothing else, so that is not something that then rips the family apart afterwards.
I can speak from me, I suppose, my mother again. But I remember that she'd started, she called it the death committee, and she used to put of savings, and she used to say, right, at the local mosque, she used to save up, and I think they're still going, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
And that's for a person to plan their funeral, and not, like you said, have some kind of on the family. It's very stressful and everything else. So she's used to, put whatever she could in this box and then take it off, and they all used to get together and talk about it and stuff. But I know personally, my husband, his father passed away here in this hospice actually, and my father-in-law, I remember that he'd already pre-planned, so none of us had to kind of worry, and he'd already for years and years planned that this is a separate pot, and that's for the funeral costs. I mean, it's very expensive, isn't it? Because we don't get cremated. We have to be very careful. So again, it's a separate plot, isn't it? So I don't get the expense there. You don't buy it plot personally headed. There's all that going on. So yeah, that's the only aspect of it that I can kind of tell.
Just to answer the actual question more directly and help with the advanced care plans that you mentioned, and help you and the person that you're treating and supporting with those difficult conversations as far as what's taboo and what to be more sensitive around topics. So obviously euthanasia, I think, is generally a bit of a taboo subject, but specifically within the Muslim faith, within the Islamic faith, it is something that's completely forbidden within the Muslim faith. I'm not allowed to end my own life. My life was given to me without my choice. It will end when the Lord decides it will end, not by my choice. And therefore I don't have the right, because it's so precious, to end it myself. Yeah,
assisted dying.
Exactly.
Which I think it's probably too big a subject
Yeah.
to go in here.
Yeah.
But I mean, likewise for Catholics,
Yeah.
it has been a
Yeah.
taboo. But I mean, the difference between church and state is very clear, and needs to be kept separate.
Yeah.
And modern life will dictate other things than traditional faiths or beliefs.
Yeah.
Will
And then
still kind of.
Sorry. Yeah. Just to complete the answer to the question, and then just to share a couple of other subjects as well. Roxy and myself were just talking before the actual session started, and she helps with people with substance abuse. So the cause of death obviously is important. So if there is anything, a question mark around that type of thing, is it substance abuse, those kind of things, they may be taboo subjects with the wider community and family members, so just be more sensitive around that. And then finally, from myself and from my experience as well, also being aware and having that conversation with the actual patient themselves and then the wider family as far as their preference as to where to be buried. I'm in a happy position to be able to share with you that it's not so much an issue in this day and age, unfortunately, with our generation, as what it used to be with my father's generation, where the tradition always was when they passed that they would ask to be sent back home. So the dead body had to be debalmed and all the rest of it, and it was sent to Pakistan, India, wherever. And that was complicated, expensive, and upheaval for the family. And in the actual faith itself, it's completely forbidden. You're not meant to do that. The body is very precious. You're not supposed to cause any harm to it. And this is why the actual ritual washing of a dead body before it's placed in the grave is done with warm, lukewarm water and very gently, because we believe that the body can still feel the pain and things like that. So to have it debalmed and that evasive process, and then to be put on a plane and sent to abroad on that journey completely against the faith. But the cultural expectation was so strong that many people were actually doing it, even though they knew that it was against the teachings of the faith. So as far as taboo subjects, just to keep that on your radar, whilst that patient is still coherent and have some sort of level of capacity, if you don't feel comfortable yourself having that conversation, then maybe getting somebody from the local mosque. The chaplain from the local trust is very active, has a lot of experience in supporting people in this type of situation. They can have that conversation because it's coming from an authentic person with that knowledge, with that experience, and they're able to say that you're actually causing yourself harm by choosing this preference and wanting your body to be sent abroad, and then you're giving difficulty to your family, there's the extra expenditure, all those kind of things. And from an Islamic point of view, you're actually better being buried where you actually die, in the town, in the city that you die. That would help, and that would avoid a massive taboo subject, and it would alleviate a lot of the stress from the family of that person, that patient as well, because then they don't have that clash and conflict with their loved one as well.
One of the questions from Sequel before the session was, what does a good death look like in your community? So what would be the things that you would want to see around those kind of rituals and things like that, when somebody is at the point when they're dying?
A priest, last rites, very important for most Catholics. And I suppose it's a good death. It's a bit of a strange term to use, if you don't mind me saying, because I mean, no death in itself is, I suppose, nobody wants to die. Nobody wants many of these people to die. To be done at home and to be done with your family around you is one of the main things. That's an ideal death. It very rarely happens, and partly because death has become a very much medicalized, specialized topic in its way. We've lost the women who used to come in and wash the body. I mean, it was very common, still does happen sometimes in Ireland, was too old-fashioned over here and was very quickly lost. The mourners, the actual professional mourners, it was all part of a set ritual that allowed people to get their grief out there. The wake, all this organisation like that, and to have your family around you. We have the Victorian view of it, but it still can happen. And certainly to us, to have my mother somewhere like the hospice, which she wanted to be here rather, that took a lot of pressure off all of us. There's a lot of us, there's 7 of us, obviously all around the country, all had to get here. And you were very extremely kind with the number of visits that we were all making at various times. Whereas my father wanted a good death in his own bed, and that went very well. How we would have coped if he had spent a period of time dying, it was very, very quick. One day he was well, 2 days later he was dead. With my mother, it was weeks, months, in fact 3 years, because she was terminally ill. Whereas my father died really of old age, and that was it. So I think a good death is very personal to the person that's actually doing the dying. But as long as people are there, they're not in pain. I think that's the thing most people fear is being in pain, and it's the thing that actually your relatives fear, because it's very difficult to know how you can help someone when you can't understand where it hurts, or whether it's not actually pain, it's fear. And that is an incredibly difficult thing to deal with. So I mean that's I would throw that out to you. Is that actually there's so many aspects of that a good death is very easy to say but very difficult to achieve.
Yeah, I think we all have this. Well, I particularly have this image of my mother being surrounded by, but she died in COVID, so you weren't allowed to see her. She went in, 10 days later she passed away, and she passed away on my daughter's birthday, and I'll never forget, it was like we had 2 Zoom calls and that was it. Totally unexpected. She was 67 years old. And it was like, well, how do you kind of process this then? This is not how it was meant to happen. We were all meant to talk to her. We were all meant to, me and my siblings, we were meant to get everything off his chest, everything we've always, it just didn't happen like that. And then my grandma passed away 2 days later. Then my cousin died we had 5 deaths in a very short space of time. And it was like, oh my God, what do we do with this? And it's part of it. And spiritually, you can kind of come to, a good death. My mother's kind of view on it always was a good death. She wanted to die on a Friday, which is the holy day. She wanted to die early because she didn't want to be a burden on any of us. And she wanted to go with all her senses intact. And that's exactly how she went. It was incredible, really. But yeah, she got her prayers answered.
And I think that's a really important point when you talk about all the senses being
Yes,
intact.
yeah,
Sure, because for some people, that's why they might struggle with having medication, things like that might, and that be helping them for their symptoms, but it may actually render them unable to have their senses fully intact, and that does have implications for how we look after people sometimes, and we need to listen and know about that, to help them.
It's it is frustrating that, and I think anyone who's lost anyone within that COVID, it was just surreal. And I think it's harder to kind of process and get over somebody passing away like that. And there's so many people in the country, isn't there, who've lost relatives. There were so many people dying. The graveyards were just full every day. There was just like 10 funerals every day of these people. It was like, my God. But, and again, another kind of taboo thing, I was saying this to Louisa before, that I didn't actually go and see my mum in a coffin. I couldn't do it. Now, culturally, I was expected to, but I just couldn't do it. My last image of my mother had to be her laughing and chatting on that sofa with a brew and telling me off. And it was like, I'm happy with that. I didn't want to see her. And grief is a very private thing. And I don't care what anybody tells me. And I'm quite headstrong like that. I go with what I feel and not what is expected of me. And that's what's important for me. It's my own journey, isn't it?
And that you made a really good point there, Roxy, actually, in that seeing someone who's dead is very important. And that is something that we have completely lost.
Yeah.
You're told they're dead, they're at the chapel of rest. And you might go and see them. Very often people don't. My mother was moved from here back to her own bed, and we all said goodbye in her own bed. My father died in his bed, and we saw him laid out, and then he was taken away. That is, and forgive me if I equate it to animals now, but it's very important to get that initial belief that they are gone, because a dead body looks very different to the live person you were just seeing.
100%.
It's extraordinary. I mean, and I've seen very violent death when I was traveling through Pakistan. Very violent death. And that will always stay with me. So to me, a good death is definitely in a bed. But the person that was lying in the bed was not the same person that I had said goodbye to. And I think that's something that really ought to be, and I hate to say this, but ought to be encouraged to be brought back. Because there is something cathartic about seeing the body with the spirit gone.
With Politicity is a massive difference, because in Poland people would prefer to pass away in hospitals, in full care providers, when they can be looked after, or the hospices. If there is like a chance, of course. But I've noticed here in England, Polish people prefer to stay at home and they prefer to pass away around what they worked for very hard, in their homes with their family, in a peaceful environment, and with a really big respect. So that's what I've noticed from my experience.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So do you think maybe they'd kind of almost changed their perspective when they moved to the UK and maybe seeing a different way of people dying?
Yeah. I think it's because even though we live in England for many years, maybe not myself, but like my parents, my mum, she still is very strong Polish lady. She's got really strong roots and traditions, and she'll always say she loves living here and she loves the country and that's her home now. But she is Polish and she does live in the Polish traditions where we have to speak Polish at home. My son doesn't do that and very often. And but when I was talking to her about what she wants, really, it was more of it's your decision. Whatever you do with me, I just want to go peacefully with a respect at home. But whatever you do, it's up to you. And I do also believe in Poland is different because due to history, due to the Second World War, where the topic death and the dying itself, it opens really big wounds, and we still have like our grandmothers and grandparents, they still remember situations from back there, and I think that's also why they prefer to go to the hospitals and get the help, get the medication, don't suffer at home basically.
I think there's also a change within the sanitized way of death, which we have really believed that we should have done from the post-industrial, communities, and I think we're having a fight back against the municipal. We want it to be much more personal, much more. People want to be more involved, and I think for a long time people believed they couldn't be involved, and that it was an actual. It was a process. It was a civic process of dying. And there've been a couple of programs, I think, on television that have kind of exploded that myth. You don't have to have an undertaker. You can actually take someone yourself to be buried. You don't actually have to be buried in consecrated ground or in a churchyard, as long as you're not over a ditch and you actually have registered the ground. You can be buried literally where you like. I mean, I don't suggest anyone takes a spade and starts digging someone's garden up because they rather liked the rose tree in there. But I mean, there was this kind of very precious and very much protected view that only certain people were qualified to do certain things, and it's nothing to do with the actual process of dying. It was what would happen to the body afterwards. That it should be rushed away. That people shouldn't be left to view it, to say their final goodbyes. Everything should go boom, 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 very, very quickly, and it was in the hands of professionals. And I think that has very much changed now. And I personally, I think that's for the good.
In tour with the theme of Islam and Muslims having a practical faith, and that being essential in every aspect of life. So the actual prayer for a good death, as far as what a good death is in Islam, is that, "Oh Lord, give me health and let me be healthy and live a full life, as long as living is better for me." And when death is actually better than living for me and better than life, as far as not wanting to just live for the sake of living and having a poor existence, then take me with faith. So if I can start with that premise first of all, and then if I can move on to two strands, first of all, from a personal point of view, to answer your question and for the benefit of the colleagues in the room, as far as helping someone for that stage of planning for departure. From a person who would be in that situation, what your wanting to ensure is that that individual has an opportunity for last rites. So from a Muslim Islamic faith point of view, before you start introducing the butterfly, morphine, all those kind of things, any kind of medication where they're not going to be complementous anymore, where they're not going to be conscious anymore, having that conversation with the patient if possible, ideally, and then the immediate family to say this is an opportunity for them to say any last rites, because that will be a good death for them. And that opportunity, I need to make that very clear for you, for the benefit of this exercise and for the benefit of this whole part, the point of what we're doing here today. That's very, very important from a Muslim point of view, to be able to, for that individual to be able to say those last rites. That will give that individual comfort and the satisfaction of they've had a good death, because that's the last words on their tongue before they've gone under. And that will also give comfort to the immediate family around them as well, that they've been able to do that and vocalize that before they've gone. And they've actually witnessed that as well. That will give them genuine comfort from that. Then once they've gone under, whether it's a state of unconsciousness or eventually bereavement and passed, the next stage, if I can move that a little bit further out, as far as a good death, what that means for the immediate family and the wider family and friends, would be the expediting of that whole process as far as releasing of the body, then them being able to get a death certificate and following those practical steps. And this is where the advanced care planning comes into place that we all know about. And if you can include this in the detail that you're doing with patients and who to see at that point, which GP or whoever would actually do the death certificate. And then you got extra bureaucracy now with the medical examiner and how that works. So having those kind of conversations in advance, so those can be quickly and expedited as smoothly as possible. And then even releasing the body to the family members so that they can do that ritual bathing. They can then go to the actual, what they would do is present the body to the women first, because and show the body. And if it's a female, the women are allowed to see both male and female, equal ops. But if it's a male, and if it's a female that's passed away, the men are not allowed to see the face of the deceased. Okay, so there's that distinction. But the body nonetheless will be presented to the women first. They will allow to have some time with the deceased before then it's taken to the mosque for the actual funeral prayers. So the point I'm making, I'm sorry, I'm laboring it a little bit, but that whole process, the quicker and most efficient way that can be done would give a good death for the family, the immediate family members of that individual that's passed away. And that will help them have a good death experience. And then they can actually lay that body to rest and then start the process of mourning. And because what is also compounding the whole experience is the added pressure of people coming from all over the country to pay respects, and having to facilitate that in terms of accommodation, in terms of food, and all those kind of things as well. So whilst the death and everything is important, they want to get those pragmatic steps done as well as try and balance and juggle all those kind of things. And having had the unfortunate experience of having had that for my daughter and for my father, excuse my emotions, but doing that gives peace to that family when their body's laid to rest. And then it allows the whole process to be done in a much more positive way. Because they ultimately, if the process sometimes, for example, is delayed, and that causes undue stress to those family members. And that can be avoided, where it can be avoided, it should be.
I was just going to say, when you said about process, and especially at home, we hadn't realised that actually, if the doctor hadn't come 2 or 3 days before, when we actually thought my father was going downhill, and said to us, we'll get the district nurses organised, but here is a purple form. Now, I had never heard of a purple form, so I just thought, well, maybe it's just the doctor giving us a purple form. Anyway, she said that they would all be ready. We went down. Had we not had that form, then his deathbed would have been a crime scene. And I think people need to actually know those practicalities, because I then did have a few people ringing me and saying, oh, Lordy, it was terrible when my parent died at home. The police came round, we were taken out. all because it was perfectly obvious there had no been skullduggery, but it was treated as a crime scene. And everybody wanting to die at home needs to know that those kind of practicalities need to be in place just to ensure that you're not suddenly faced with something that is just, well, I mean, it's rather like a very nasty nightmare when you're at the most low point in your, in this whole ghastly journey. Yes. Yeah. But I mean, it's something that I had absolutely no knowledge of. And if the doctor had not been kind enough to have said that, and we just thought, oh, we won't, had forgotten about it, it would have been a whole different kind of worms. Yeah.
The Macmillan nurse that was looking after my daughter, she said to me specifically, make sure your GP sees Hania every 2 weeks. She didn't tell me why. And it's only at that stage that I understood the wisdom behind that.
Yeah.
And as far as the certification of death, and that can only be done if they've seen him in the last 2 weeks. And I understand it's changed now, and I think it's a bit longer now. But still, there's those wisdoms that if, while you can have, even if you don't have it within the patient, with the family members, it will make a very good death and a very difficult stage of life, and a very difficult stage of things much more easier and done in a much more calmer way.
Well, the problem is, of course, you don't really repeat this particular episode in one's life. It happens once, and it happens in a different way each time. So if you don't get it right the first time, you don't, it's not a practice run.
Within the community, especially around COVID, we saw so many miscommunications, misinformations, and misunderstandings. So the general consensus, or the general kind of feeling in the community, was that if you're 70 plus and you get COVID, don't let them go to the hospital, because they're not going to come back home, because they're not interested in saving anybody 70 plus, and it's just about prioritizing resources on people who are healthier and younger and who've still got some life left. So those kind of misconceptions, if that's what you mean.
I mean, I suppose I would go back to the one where everyone believes that you've got to have a professional in one way or another to deal with your loved one, and you don't anymore, and you never actually did. But we kind of kidded ourselves, probably in a way because it passed the buck. You didn't have to deal with it. We're very good at doing that. So I suppose that's the only thing I would probably bring up on that count.
I can say a Polish community in England very often don't fully understand what hospice do, and they don't know what services we provide, and how can we support the families and the person affected by illness. So that's a big misunderstanding there, really.
And which was actually underlined by people's understanding of the assisted dying bill. They really didn't understand palliative care, and I suppose mainly because there are fewer hospices than we need, and they are very much within their communities. So I think actually it needs to be better information getting out there as to what palliative care is, and that it doesn't mean you're about to drop off your post. Quite frankly, there's a lot more to it than that. But it is a matter of educating the public.
In Polish culture, children are most of the time they're staying away from that. They are taken away from that. I remember as a child, we didn't really go to any funerals. Me and my sisters, we were always, nobody really talked to us about what's happening. But what we could see is our mother crying in the bathroom, for example, trying to hide, or our grandparents crying, getting dressed in black and everything. So it is, I believe it's to protect children emotionally, but I believe right now it's not a good thing, because then growing up, I didn't understand what's happening. And when my father passed away when I was 9, I have been told because it's my father, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to react. I couldn't go to the funeral because I was a child. But then when I was an adult and I faced the death of very close relative, I just still didn't know what to do. I didn't know how I should react and where to go, and even like what should I like talk to, like how can I talk to people, how to say I'm really sorry, if you know what I mean. And so I think it's very important a Polish community should start to talk to children about it. And I think this is as well one of the taboo where the children are like locked in the room and they can't hear about it. They can't go and see the family of the person who passed away or go to the funeral.
Yes, I mean, I think it's one of the things that we tend to do is assume that people mustn't be upset. And for some reason, is it not more upsetting not to know what's going on and to find conversations ceasing as soon as you come into the room? I think, again, just reverting back to what I said about seeing the body, I mean, I think in most healthy cultures where a healthy interest and participation in the death process takes place, and I wouldn't say that in the Western world we particularly have one, because I think it's important at that time that everybody gets a job, that everybody feels included, that you are able to say goodbye. But it was this way of hiding death. And I think by having this conversations like these more often, I think people can see. There will obviously be people who don't want to go and see a body. They don't want to see their loved one. But it's a choice. And as long as they've given that choice, I think that is much more healthy than being told you're not a part of this process.
Yeah. I think that me personally, growing up, from a very, very young age, attending mosque, and it was openly spoken about. Death was openly spoken about preparing for having a good life, about what I needed to do to have this good life. Talking about the hereafter, life after death, was encouraged all the time. And even now, I mean, I joke about it now, and I say I'm collecting brownie points for heaven. That's what I'm doing, you know, this is my good thing, and this is... But it's a subject again that I think these days in the mosques, if I can ask yourself, I think it's still taught that way, isn't it? Openly. And that's the way that in my culture, that's from many years, that's all I can remember. It was an open subject. And you were encouraged to ask questions about what happens after we die, where do we go, you know. And there was a place that I only learnt after my mother passed, and it was Barzakh, which is the waiting area, as they call it, don't the purgatory. And I'm like, oh my God, I'd never heard of it before. And it was only until you lose someone very close that you ask questions and you kind of trying to understand what's happened to them and where have they gone and can they still hear me and things like that. So yeah, probably from the age of 5, we were encouraged to talk openly about death.
So again, from a faith background and the practical side again, if I can just repeat that. So how we, whether it's adults or children, and we get our heads around and we console people, we try to use prophetic tradition and examples and experiences there as the way to behave at any point in life, good or bad, happy or sad. And on that aspect, one particular incident that happened to who we believe to be the prophet was when he lost his own son. And he's now buried his son, and he's climbing out of the grave, and his companions around him are seeing tears on his face. So all this talk that we've already shared with you, how Islam is practical, it mentions death almost on a daily basis, it's very everyday language. All that aside, you would then expect equally to be said, well, you can't mourn, you can't cry, you can't show any emotion because it's part of your faith. And to do so would be almost misunderstandingly possibly against your faith. That, oh, if you're crying, if you're showing any kind of emotion, you're actually going against your faith because you've just told us that this is very much part of your faith. So why? So this is what the companions they were of this kind of mindset. That what are you of all people, or Prophet of Allah? Why are you crying? Because they saw the tears, and him being a human first before anything else was able to share with them yes, I have full belief that I will see my son in the hereafter, the next life. And I have full belief in that. But nonetheless, just like when we see we're very close to someone and they're going abroad on a holiday, all the rest of it, just that period of separation from each other, there is that little bit of emotion and upset. But we know we're going to see them again in 2 weeks' time after they come back from whatever, the holiday or whatever. But just that little bit of separation and time away does invoke emotion. And that's how he described his position at the loss of his son. So very, like I say, human kind of approach. Nothing about being a prophet, nothing about the Islamic teachings, not going heavy on any of that. Just that very practical, down to earth, practical advice and personal experience. So that's what we try to focus on. And then with myself and losing my daughter, the way I console myself is, and I'm sorry, I appreciate the questions are more about children and the focus on children and how we talk to them and have normalized conversations with children. But if I can just share this first, on a practical level, I lost my daughter and she was at the age of 4 and I was only in my 30s at the time. And I'm thinking, okay, even if she was healthy, alive and all the rest of it, how long would I actually have with her? 30 years, 40 years max? Eventually one of us would have to go and there would be that period of separation again. Whereas in the hereafter, I will have her forever. And we believe that any child that dies in childhood is a source of intercession for that parent in the hereafter, and that they will be reunited. So it's that hope and it's that optimism that keeps me going, that I know I will be reunited with my daughter in the hereafter and there will be no separation after that. So that's the kind of positive spin, a way of consoling. With children, exactly as you said, if I can just make this final point, that children, and to answer the question directly, the way that they're given consolation about a family member passing is that they're reminded that, again, this life is very temporary and that we will all have to leave. So it's a very kind of almost mature conversation, even with the child, and a practical kind of type of conversation. And the Prophet himself, when one particular set of parents passed away and the child came to the Prophet and asked about his parents, that where are they? And it was difficult for him to say that your parents have passed away. And the way that he communicated that with them, with that child, was to say, your parents have gone, but would it not be better and more happy, would it not please you if I was your father now and my wife Aisha was your mother now? And that was his way of trying to reach to that child and console that child, that yes, you've had a huge loss, but nonetheless I'm still here for you to support. So it's just another way of trying to console. But with children, as we've already discussed, especially within the Muslim faith, with it being a very everyday, practical type of conversation. But the important thing is they are recognized as human beings first, before faith, before anything else. So if there is a period that needs of mourning that needs to happen, whether it's child or adult, let it happen. I shared emotions with you earlier, and I'm not embarrassed to share those emotions, because as much as I'm a man, I might look all hurly-burly and strong and all the rest of it. But I'm much less of a man than who I believe to be the Prophet. And if the Prophet can shed tears at the loss of his child, then who am I? So there is no embarrassment in this, is what I'm saying. So whether it's whoever that we give them that space, give them that time, give them that opportunity to share those emotions, it is a way of healing. And also,
can I just put one kind of slight proviso on that? There is a danger that one goes all out on death, and that you almost want the child to vent and to be upset. Children process things in many different ways, and I'm a great believer in just letting people do it in their own way, but being there to inform and discuss and be very open. But we are in danger in many ways in this present world of wanting people to be upset, because it makes us feel better, because then we feel that we're actually helping do something rather than actually making them do something, which is probably going to be much more detrimental later on. Sorry, I just thought I ought to say that. Yeah.
From your own perspective and your own community and culture, what would be the one thing that you would like people to sort of take away from today? Something that you really feel that they should know about?
Ritual. Ritual is a really great help when you're slightly at sea with things. So, I mean, and this is just from me. So my Catholic religion, the ritual within that, followed by
family who all know how to follow that particular ritual. And that is nice to be able to share that one moment with people. Yeah, and it brings you all together. You all understand what you're doing, and it's easy to, there's a beginning and there's an end.
I think to accept the support and help from hospice, from old palliative care and nurses and everyone.
Yeah. So to be open to that support and
not
to
to
look
be
after
afraid of it.
Yeah, to look after it.
I just think that the biggest thing for me that stands out is just respecting people's wishes. Whatever, it might not fall right with us, it might think, all right, why are they doing that? And it's a bit weird. But for that person, it's their life, isn't it? And it's their choice. And I think that's really, really important, especially at the end of life. Whatever choices, and just to listen, and cultural expectations, whatever someone's got, it works for them. If it doesn't work for us, that's okay. But if it works for them, it's their life, it's their journey, let them do it.
For me, when I worked in IT many years ago, my first manager taught me the proverb, which has stayed with me for life, for everything in life. And I thought that's very useful advice for anything in any way. And he mentioned about how we've all heard this, I'm sure, where you can either give a person a fish and they feed for a day, or you give them a fishing net and they're self-sustained and they're fish for life and they can look after themselves. So why am I mentioning that here? From a health professional, from supporting people with palliative, all these things, don't try to be all things to all people, but give them the knowledge and the power so that they can then make their own decisions. And if we can take a holistic approach, so sometimes we get very dogged and very blinkered in our roles and think that this is my role and nothing beyond it. Whereas if we have a holistic approach, and we can, my message would be, the one takeaway is plan ahead. And plan ahead, not just on the practical side of things, as far as from the clinical point of view, as far as medication, or from the fair side of things, as far as what happens at the point of death and then after, or the financial side of things, as far as probate, what happens to my my financials, my money, my property, all these things. But have that holistic approach. Even as a health professional, although those things may not be, you don't need to be an expert in any of those additional things, but just having that holistic approach and being able to have that conversation with the individual and say, look, there is all these other things that you need to be aware of. I'm not an expert in those things, but working within in this committee, I have contact with those people, the spiritual people, the financial advice people, those types of things. And I can put you into touch with those people. And then hopefully seeing the calmness of that. Because what I think, and another key point for me, if I can share, is what might be important to us is not necessarily important to that individual. Having cared for cancer patients, you'll be surprised how many people before treatment, we're thinking what's going to be important to them is they're not going to be able to work after treatment. So they must be worried about their finances. Or they might need support at home, so how they're going to get care if they live on their own. Actually, when you ask the question and you're bothered to listen to the actual individual, they might be just thinking, who's going to walk my dog? Who's going to water my plants? So what might be completely non-sensical or non-essential questions to us, but it's about that individual and them leading their care and the whole concept of personalized care and support. So have a holistic approach, and you're not supposed to be an expert in everything, but just to know where to sign or refer as necessary, and then let them lead the conversation, let them empower them, give them the information or give them an outline, and then let them go with it wherever they want to, and you support them. Will get benefit for you because it means you can easily just focus on what they feel is important and give them the satisfaction of prioritizing and give them peace that what they've actually got burning inside they've actually dealt with.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. So, I mean, I think we could pretty much sit here all day and listen because it's intriguing. It's refreshing to hear that it's, a lot of individual things there that come out that are different for all of us, but also that there's a lot of commonalities that bring us all together. The big thread there about talking to each other, listening to each other, individual wants and needs there. So a lot of things that bring us together about death and dying, whatever culturally we live in. So in a minute, I will say thank you to the panel because I know you're all going to give them a massive clap. But it's just to say that, you know, we're really, really grateful to have them here. It's been really interesting. I hope you've taken things away from it. Please feel free at the end to grab yourself a drink and then just come back in and have a chat with each other about things. But that's just finally to say, like, a huge, okay. Yeah, so a huge thank you, big round of applause, and then I'll hand over to Bader.